gentleman who's been working long and hard. He's been joining me from time to time on the Sunday show is Rocco Miller, bracketologist. You can follow him on Twitter at Rocco Miller8, bracketeer.org, and also Fielding 68. Is that right? Fielding the 68?
Fielding the 68.
I like it.
Yes.
With the field of 68 fellas over there. Rocco Miller was at Gonzaga St. Mary's last night. So I'll start right there, Rocco, with Gonzaga and St. Mary's. Gonzaga is a fascinating team that we've talked about a bunch here on the network, where the predictive analytics love them, right? The net, Bart Torvik, Ken Pom, they love this Gonzaga team. But the resume did get an enhanced win yesterday, but doesn't match what those predictive numbers say. So what do you think the committee does with Gonzaga come Sunday?
Yeah, great question. So Gonzaga clearly playing their best basketball right now. I was at their games in the Bay Area the week before, and they're crushing it. Biggest win of the year on the resume yesterday. And I think with Gonzaga this year, we've had them around that 8-9 game for weeks.
Yeah.
So they're out of that. That's the good news. So I think their floor is a 7. I did the whole exercise this morning. They're basically the only significant result yesterday for inside the bubble teams, and they came in as my top 7.
Okay.
But that's probably good news for Gonzaga to get a 6, because the teams they're getting compared to, like your BYUs, your Marquettes, your Kansas, your Louisvilles, most of those teams are not going to win their conference tournament. Gonzaga did. So that adds to the resume. When they're talking about the teams in the room, you have that conference champion label. It helps you. And then you just look at everything else. They've got great records away from the kennel, 12-6 overall, and then 4-2 in those top 2 quad road games. They didn't get the big Kentucky win like last year,
right?
And that's going to limit them. That's why they're probably not going to get all the way to a 5 seed. And also, you got to remember last year they won at St. Mary's at the very end. They didn't get that win. They just got the one here in Vegas, which is great, but it's not the same as winning at St. Mary's. So a little bit limited resume-wise still, but I think they've got enough juice to get to the 6.
So I'm going to be selfish and ask about the conference that I enjoy quite a bit. That is the Mountain West. But they're pretty fascinating. Looks like it's going to be another multi-bid year for the Mountain West, but the fly in the ointment could be Colorado State, because they are red hot and could win this whole thing. So if Colorado State wins, what is the Mountain West looking like when you're talking about some of these teams getting in?
Yeah, no, I think the easiest way to sum it up, and I agree with you, I would pick Colorado State to win it. I think they have the best draw, even better than New Mexico's draw, just because you got both Boise and San Diego State in the top. And they're playing the best the last month and a half. That's quite clear. So I think that's probably what the league needs. I think you've got the 3, New Mexico, Utah State, San Diego State. They're all going to get in. And then, Boise's right there. You can take Boise, but just knowing how the committee usually treats the Mountain West and knowing that Boise's got a little bit of bad. They lost that Boston College game a long time ago. They lost the Washington State game that aged terribly. And they just won all their big games in Idaho. I think they would like to see a little bit more away from the state of Idaho, unfortunately for the Broncos, that either the Broncos winning it all or your Rams winning it all, or maybe if UNLV or somebody else gets it. That's probably the likely way Mountain West gets 4. If any of those 3 I mentioned at the start win it, they might be stuck with 3.
So I got to follow up with this. So if it is Colorado State, you hear the term, bid stealer thrown out there a lot. And we talked about it briefly earlier in the show. The AAC could have one if Memphis doesn't win. The A10, I'll talk about VCU, probably not, but we'll dive into that. But let's say it's Colorado State, or let's say it is Boise State that gets that 4th bid out of that league. Who is going to get knocked out in your eyes? Because we saw it tonight, Ohio State loses again. They're now 17-15, and I was joking. I'm like, I don't want to see this team in the NCAA tournament, but I get it, metrics, all of that. So who is that team that is very much cheering for New Mexico and Memphis and teams like that? Duke, Clemson, Louisville, they don't want anyone shenanigans in the ACC, Rocco.
Yeah, well, I think there's a chunk of teams, guys. I don't think anybody knows if they're the last team in or not, but there's like a good handful that kind of know they're in the danger zone. And I would start that list right now after today with West Virginia.
Oh, yeah.
West Virginia, I think they're still going to find their way in because they won at Kansas. That Gonzaga win has aged well since last night and other factors. Arizona's a nice win down in the Bahamas. But what the committee can do with West Virginia is you got Drake DeVries played in a couple of those big wins. So they could actually re-examine them without those 8 games, and you might be able to argue that they don't belong in. So they're in thin ice. Then, of course, you got Xavier. See how they do with Marquette tomorrow. Huge game there.
That is huge, yeah.
You have Oklahoma. They're going to play Georgia here momentarily. I think Oklahoma is extremely dicey no matter what happens tonight, just based on
34-32 right now. Oklahoma.
Oh, they are playing.
I'm glad you brought them up because I was going to ask you about them. Yeah,
I'm just proving how in the weeds I've been. I don't even know when they're playing anymore.
Yeah.
So Oklahoma, especially a loss tonight, a win will obviously always help, but a loss tonight, there's so many reasons you could take them out. And then you've got UC Irvine's my last team in, and again, I think that's a perfect world thing.
You have them in.
I have them as the last team in. Yeah, and
so
again,
you have the Big West being a two-bid league right now.
A two-bid league, but I think that is all based on today's circumstance. Today's circumstance is no bid steal so far.
Okay.
And that obviously is probably going to change. Average year is 2.5. Last year we had 5. A few years ago we had 0. Mm-hmm. So we don't know. But I think if we get to the end and somehow there's no bid stealers, UC Irvine won 17 games away from Irvine. They lead the nation in that category. They're 14 true road wins, lead the nation. They have a quad 1A win at the Tritons of UC San Diego. So
Can I just jump in real quick?
Yeah.
So the Big West tournament starts. It started, and I think a lot of us are anticipating and hoping for, to be honest, UC Irvine versus UC San Diego in a championship game. If we get that, Rocco, in your eyes, if UC San Diego loses that game, are they on a better? Do they have better footing than UC Irvine?
Much better footing.
Okay.
Yeah.
And where would you have you? Let's say Irvine wins. Where do you have UC San Diego?
I think they probably get sent to Dayton.
Okay.
But I think they're better than a lot of the teams. The four I just listed, I think they'd still be above them because they won at Utah State. These teams from this level, the Big West level, don't get a lot of chances.
Right.
And UC San Diego's just been supremely dominant. So they have 2 big wins. They won at Irvine. They're the first team to win at Irvine in 2 years.
Wow.
And they won at Utah State above the cut line. So usually, and Drake had that too with their Vanderbilt win, usually the committee, like Indiana State last year example, right? They didn't get that win. These 2 teams had it all year because of the Utah State win and Drake's win over Vandy. So it's going to be really hard to take the Tritons out. And that is definitely the best case scenario for the league. And also they could lose to UC Riverside, who's beaten them before, but they probably don't want that. It's a worse loss on the quad. So you lose to Irvine, it's a quad 1, quad 2 type of loss.
So we talked about Ohio State. What do you think Indiana's looking at right now?
Yeah, Indiana's just right above Dayton for me. So they're in that 10-11 tweener zone. And you got to look at it worst case, right? So they wake up tomorrow, lose to Oregon. You add another loss to the pile. That would make the Hoosiers 4-13 in quad 1. It's not a good win percentage. Last year, Oklahoma, 4-12, quad 1, left out.
Yeah.
So plenty of reason that these are the teams I call the repeal teams because as soon as bids get stolen, you got to start repealing teams off the board. And you're going to start attacking your Oklahomas, Indianas, Xaviers, UC, either one.
Sure.
And those are the teams that are sitting there on the cliff.
North Carolina, right, as well? They're not very good in quad 1. What's their fate?
Do they need to beat Duke?
See, that's the $1,000,000 question because it's North Carolina.
Right. Yeah.
I said this earlier. If their name was Davidson and they had the exact,
we wouldn't have this conversation.
If they had the exact same results, they would be clearly out.
Yep.
But we know who the chairman is. Bubba Cunningham, athletic director of North Carolina. He's not allowed to be in the room when they're discussed. We get that. But that doesn't mean he can't take people to lunch, to dinner. It doesn't mean everybody else in the room doesn't know what his real job is. So there's just that dynamic of being in a committee. And I did a mock committee last weekend, and we do that every year. And it's a great exercise because it's not about what you think. It's about what a group comes up with.
Yeah.
And Carolina, quite honestly, you guys watch the way they perform every game. They're playing well. I mean, they are. They just play in a bad league, so the wins aren't adding up to much for the resume.
Sure.
And they're not fixing that 1-11 quad 1 problem. But I think they go out tomorrow. They get a Wake Forest game, which is still quad 2. And then you get the Duke game. If they play Duke tight again, like I had UC Irvine as that last team in, but Carolina is my first team out because of that. I think it'd be a cliffhanger.
If they beat Duke in the semis, does that lock them in?
I think they would get in, and I think they probably win the tournament anyway at that point.
Yeah,
because they'd be playing so darn well.
Yeah.
And I have a feeling they're going to win it. I don't know why.
You think they're going to win the whole thing?
Or
win the Duke?
Are we going to get another NC State? Is this what's going to happen?
Yeah. And then if Carolina wins this tournament, think about this. If they beat Wake, they beat Duke, then they beat like Louisville or Clemson.
Sure.
Those great wins all of a sudden.
Yeah.
They're going to go from like out of the field to like an 8 seed. And we're going to be like,
God.
So just prepare yourself because you heard it here first if it happens. If they flame out tomorrow, we can have a really good laugh.
Yeah, that's it's an early game, 2:30 Eastern tip time. UNC taking on Wake Forest there in that one.
Well, we only got a minute left. I guess I'll ask, who's going to be the biggest snub? I know we still have a lot left, but who do you think is going to be that team?
Oh, man, I don't want to wish this on anybody. In my world, it'd be one of the Big West teams, but publicly they're not going to get that kind of attention. I think, Oklahoma, I don't think it's a real snub, but just the fact that they're an SEC. The one to really watch out for that's kind of feels like they're safe, but you can take them out for one reason, is Vanderbilt. So Vanderbilt gets to the finish line with another loss today, and they're just 500 in what I call meaningful games. When that's just quite honestly, you take away quad 4, tell me your record. Right now they're 12-12. Well, Vanderbilt by far has the worst non-conference strength of schedule. The committee's always hated that if you're close to the bubble. So if the actual committee puts Vandy close to the cut line, they're not going to get in.
Let's talk more about the teams that are entrenched, the 1s, the 2s, the 3s. We'll talk more of that. Rocco Miller, bracketologist, bracketeer.org. He's going to stick around for one more segment on VSiN Primetime. Rocco Miller joining us for another segment here in studio. You are going to be headed to Henderson?
I am.
To take in a little Cal Poly tonight?
I am. I got to get back home tomorrow, so I figured while I'm here, I got to go check out the Big West tournament. This is going to be it has been a historically good Big West season, as we already kind of hinted at. I like the rest of the league. Cal Poly finished red hot, and I want to check them out. They're kind of a Drake light in terms of how they built their roster. Mike DeGeorge gets hired from Colorado Mesa, brings 3 of his guys, and they took injuries throughout the year, started 0-8 in the league, rallied to get into this tournament, knocked Hawaii out.
Yep.
And they're playing with house money, as you guys say, going forward. They're the deep dark horse in this tournament.
Yeah, it's a fun one. I like Cal Poly. The market disagrees. The market has come in on UC Davis, Lee's Family Forum tonight, the start of the Big West tournament. Right now, UC Santa Barbara leading Cal State Bakersfield. All right, before we get to the big seeds, we did have 2 auto bids tonight. We had McNeese State winning the Southland Conference. They were a massive favorite, and they took care of business. They get the win over Lamar, and then we saw American University win the Patriot League, beating Navy. What are those 2 teams right now looking like from a seed standpoint?
Absolutely. So, right where the at-large cuts off right now, it's the top 48, which really is right in the middle of the 12s. So we're going to take the 2 of the best auto bids to finish the 12 seeds. McNeese is clearly in there.
Yeah.
So they'll be a 12 just like last year. And then they might have to go to Seattle because of the fact that just the way Seattle ends up being the last geographical spot, and they'll be bottom of the 12. So being a 5-12 in Seattle, if you're a Cowboy fan, make your get a refundable ticket, but probably going to Seattle. And then with American, they've been at the bottom of the board, but with St. Francis upset and now Southern University and the SWAC losing today, they're up to 66 out of 68. So if they climb 2 more, they might not have to go to Dayton.
Okay.
But some of those leagues want Dayton for the financial opportunity.
Yeah.
So we'll see how that plays out.
All right, any questions at all about the 1 seeds and taking it down a little bit further, because I think your answer is going to be short. Any question about what the 2 line looks like?
Yeah, that final 2 spot is up for grabs.
Right?
And it's heavily debated right now. And it's really going to just come down to I think there's 2 really good choices right now between Kentucky or St. John's, and they have wildly different resumes. Kentucky, of course, on the downside's lost 9 times. But if you go off of their wins, it's just overwhelming. They've beaten Duke. They swept Tennessee. They have an Alabama win. They have over 10 wins against NCAA tournament competition. It's just a completely different schedule than St. John's played. Big East as a whole down a little bit, but the Johnnies still found 8 wins against the field. They won at Marquette to finish up. They got the UConn road win. Now the Xavier road win aged pretty well based on where it used to be. And overall, they only played 8 quad 1 games and they're 4-4. Kentucky played 19 and they're 10-9. So it's like that's why I think the committee is going to be divided. The Kentucky thing just might really impress some of those guys, and they'll be all in on them. And then St. John's are like, well, Big East champion, amazing record, and it's a tough debate.
How far does a conference tournament championship go? Like St. John's, they win the Big East, Kentucky doesn't. Is that a tiebreaker, Rocco? Because you've heard things that the committee doesn't necessarily focus on what happens on Sunday all that often. What about Saturday? So if St. John's wins the Big East tournament at the Garden and Kentucky does not win their conference tournament, is that a tiebreaker?
It can be. And if those 2 tournaments were played last weekend, it certainly would be.
Right.
But how the process plays out chronologically is they get through most of the selecting and seeding by Friday night and into Saturday morning. So by the time Big East tips off, they'll be paying attention. The game will be on. But in order to move a team, you have to do a file a motion, and then you've got to get everybody to change their mind from that early decision.
Wow.
And I think that's why, and that's the right way to say it in the committee's defense, is it's why you don't see a lot of changes, because they're a little reluctant. You had already gone through 4 days talking about this team. Is it really worth putting in? But these 2 teams, like I said, they're so dynamically different, and they're both good choices. maybe this year they would make that switch. I'm not 100% sure, but based on history, I'd probably just stick with whatever I decided Saturday morning.